I think you're starting to see the challenge that the governments have in New York, not only to negotiate among themselves, but also to have the input from stakeholders as well, because we're all part of one world, and to some extent we all want to make sure that this important process up to 2015 does in fact move us in the right direction, and that's the huge challenge. And this is fascinating to find that we're talking about the Statistical Commission in the UN, which most people never knew existed, I think, except, of course, the scientists. But I'd like to hand over my chairing of the next session to my good friend Mohamed Khalil, who is currently the Counsellor of the Permanent Mission of Egypt to the United Nations and has been in the Egyptian Ministry of Foreign Affairs since 1997. Mohamed played a significant role in the Rio+20 process, and he led the negotiations for the UN resolution on the implementation of Rio+20 and also on the establishment of the new high-level political forum, which was another output from Rio+20. And he's now showing that continued leadership in the Sustainable Development Goals Open Working Group. Mohamed.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Felix and Jamie and the Water Institute at the North Carolina University. It gives me really a great pleasure to be here today among such distinguished speakers and the audience. I would like to invite the members of the panel for this session to join me here on the podium. Anders Berntell, Ania Grobicki, Sylvia and Koch. I believe, as rightly put by Paula, my dear friend Paula, just before me, the fact that you are all here, you know, it is important. So I don't think really we're gonna dwell on that or convince with that. But what I would like to say is that I personally believe, as we are speaking about transformational change, one very important and essential aspect of this transformation is the issue of interlinkage. I believe that shifting to the new transformational agenda will really depend on how successful we're going to be in identifying, acknowledging, and implementing as well the interlinkages between the different aspects of and priorities as well of sustainable development. This was one of the important lessons that we learned from the MDG and from the past 15 years. But definitely this is easier said than done. There are huge challenges from technical standing point and political standing point as well. The first conference on the Nexus, which really was a leader in approaching this manner and raising awareness and mobilize support as well for the idea of the interlinkage and Nexus, which took place in Bonn in 2011, was an important input to the Rio+20 conference. And I'm confident that this conference as well will be another very important input to the SDG process. So for the next 70 minutes approximately, we're gonna address the issue of interlinkages and Nexus, focusing on the natural resource security. We'll try to address this issue from that perspective, how the Nexus approach can help us in achieving security of natural resources. We have here an outstanding panel of speakers who have a really big expertise on this matter from different perspectives. We will start with Andres Berntell. Andres Berntell is the Executive Director of the 2030 Water Resource Group at the IFC. And then he will be followed by Ania Grobicki, the Executive Secretary of Water Partnership. Following is going to be Sylvia, the Manager of Water at Skoll Global Threats. And finally, we will have Greg Koch, the Director of Global Water Stewardship in the Environment and Water Resource Department at Coca-Cola Company. Ideally, we should be having a presentation of 8 minutes, more or less, for each. And this would leave us approximately 30 to 40 minutes for a Q&A session. I'm looking forward really for an interesting debate, exchange, and Q&A as well. And we'll start by giving the floor for Andres. Andres, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mohamed. But also very much thank you to Felix and Jamie for inviting me here and for organizing this wonderful event. I think it's a good initiative and also very timely, so very much appreciated. 2030 Water Resource Group, just briefly as a background, we are, you can say, a public-private civil society partnership, which is established at the global level, with a number of actors coming together there to really create this kind of entity. But then what we're doing is to work on local level, and I will present some of that in my presentation here. We are addressing water resource issues as such, but of course doing that, you always are in the middle of the Nexus itself. So Nexus issues is very much part of what we're doing. I have the privilege of having 2 of my steering board members here in the panel, Ania Grobicki and Greg Koch, and also 2 other steering board members actually in the following panel in the afternoon, Dan Bena and Stuart Orr. So already there you can see that we're quite a good mixture of people coming from different kind of entities. When people like myself and others have been going to these kind of meetings over the years, we have normally emphasized the kind of relationship that we have there on the left side, the different aspects of water resources and how they can be utilized by different sectors and for different purposes. And talking about sort of the synergies and the opportunities that we have by working together in a more integrated approach, creating the win-win-win solutions, and sometimes maybe even being able to show some concrete and good examples, as we have on the right-hand side there, a catalogue of case studies on how to save both water and maybe also energy, and how the food linkages are coming in there, and showing sort of these kind of cases with a fairly positive sort of note around it. Yes, there is challenges, but I think we can do this by working together, etc. And of course, I still believe that very strongly. There are enormous opportunities. Now I'm working in a number of countries and sort of seeing the reality from a bit of a different perspective in addition. So I would like to just raise also the need to, or the realization rather, that many governments will actually face quite difficult challenges when it comes to also prioritizing between different uses of these scarce natural resources, where water is one of them. Maybe also commenting on one of the discussions that came up yesterday. As you see here, I do not have only sort of the water, food, energy nexus. And I think, as Johan pointed out, the Nexus is much broader. There are a number of aspects that are related to all of those natural resources and how we use them. And for many governments, at the core of that is, of course, the need for economic development and growth. So I'm going to take you to one country that we have started working in this year, Tanzania. You see the map there on the left. The different shades of blue versus white is sort of the variation of the rainfall there. And in the right-hand diagram, you see the distribution of that rainfall over the year. So it's a very uneven, as you see, distribution of the water there, uneven in space and in time. And there is virtually no storage capacity in Tanzania. Building dams is therefore, of course, one big opportunity for them, but as we all know, I mean, building dams is quite often controversial, sometimes rightly so, because, I mean, we all know the values of floods for ecosystem services, etc., but sometimes these dams are also challenged for more sort of principal reasons. So that is the situation there in Tanzania. If we look then at the volumes of water that can actually be used, it's primarily that sort of baseline flow that is steady over the year that is readily available for any kind of use. And then if we deduct also the amount of water needed for environmental flows, there's actually quite little water left that can be used for any economic purposes. And we can see there on the right-hand side that already today there is a higher demand than the sort of more sustainable supply of water, 45% more demand than the sustainable supply already today. And already today, that has effects both on economic activities in the country as such, where we have disruptions for manufacturing industry, disruptions for the supply to the cities, and it has also effects on the ecosystems already today. The economy of Tanzania, well, the majority of people work on agriculture. 75% is working on agriculture, which is contributing about 25% to the GDP of the country. Fairly little water is actually used for the urban sector and the service sector, and you can see the big blue part of the pie there to the right, which is representing the GDP of sort of the urban and service sectors. And the purple part is industry and construction, also using very little water, but then contributing with about 25% to the GDP as well. Paula Caballero Gomez earlier mentioned the focus and the need to have this economic growth, and definitely economic growth and development is at the core of the government of Tanzania and their agenda. And that is, of course, very understandable given where they come from. There is a need to grow and develop, and hopefully that will be a sustainable and inclusive growth as well. But reflecting on the declaration that we have seen, I think that the growth aspects and the need for economic development, which is sort of the driver behind many of those challenges, should be maybe more clearly spelt out. Tanzania, again, has a huge potential for that economic growth. It is a rich country in many ways when it comes to the opportunities for agriculture. Also mining. They have bigger gold reserves than what South Africa had earlier. They have also oil and gas. They have tourism, etc. So enormous opportunities. If we look at the growth for different sectors of the society, well, in general, it's quite a good growth, about sort of 10% per year for quite some time now. But it is also difference between different sectors. So industry and construction, very high growth. Agriculture, as you can see at the bottom, lagging behind there. If we then quantify the water requirements for the future, you can see here that the different parts of those bars represent different sectors, and at the part of the bar, second from the bottom there, you have irrigation. So that's where the big sort of plans are when it comes to development in Tanzania. And that is what really is driving the need for more water in the country. If we then look at the future and look at the two bars towards the right there, which represents the need for water by 2035 based on our growth projections, etc., you can see that there will be a gap of about 120% between sustainable supply and the projected demand, unless anything is done with a massive increase of storage, for example. So a big challenge there for the government and for the people living in Tanzania. Just going down to sort of the realities in one of the river basins. This is the Rufiji Basin, based in the southern part of Tanzania. It is part of something called SAGCOT, Southern Agricultural Growth Corridor of Tanzania, which is a major international, well, part of a major international sort of attempt to boost agricultural development, part of the G20 Grow Africa initiative, part of the World Economic Forum, New Water for Agriculture, new initiative for agriculture, a new vision for agriculture. This initiative in Tanzania is coordinated by the Prime Minister's office, so very high sort of importance from the government. So clearly a push for agriculture. At the same time, the government there also has something called delivery labs, which is something that McKinsey originally developed in Tanzania, which is basically a very good idea because you develop target in a fairly inclusive manner with a big consultation, and then ministers are held accountable for delivering on those targets. So there's an enormous pressure on the ministers to actually achieve those targets. And they have targets then for land that will be irrigated, for example. They have targets for energy production. They have targets for rural water supply. And they have targets for the national parks, so ecosystems, etc. The problem there is that no one has really made the sums. How much water would we need, for example, to achieve all of those targets? And they are definitely not compatible. Just looking at the Rufiji Basin, planned potential in one of the subcatchments only, 330,000 hectares, at present 16,000 hectares, so quite an enormous expansion of the irrigation there. And this is, of course, not realistic. There isn't enough water. At the same time, hydropower, quite low development so far. As you can see, existing 420 megawatt, planned 4,266. So also quite dramatic expansion and potential for this, and very much needed. There are blackouts today. Electricity blackouts. The problem here is that hydropower locations are quite often downstream of the agricultural at the higher plateaus. So there's not really those opportunities for combining the dams for both agriculture and hydropower, as in other cases. And here you can see that when the outcome of, or the economic outcome of water used in hydro versus agri is quite different. So they would actually need to produce rice, for example, at the level of or at the production of 3.7 ton rice per hectare, compared to today 1.6 tons per hectare, and sell it at the price of 500 Tanzanian shilling per kilogram, which is today 300, to be able to compete with the economic outcome for hydropower. So tough choices to be made by the government, and there isn't much to be gained from improved demand management in many parts of Tanzania, as we would normally refer to as the solution here, because there isn't that much development already. It's rain-fed subsistence agriculture in many parts. So there isn't industries where we can save a lot of water, or cities where we can save a lot of water, or already existing big-scale agriculture where we could save a lot of water. So just very briefly, what we are doing in many countries is to establish this kind of process. We do this kind of an economic analysis. This was just an initial economic analysis. We will go more into details in doing that. We will set up that kind of multi-stakeholder platform to discuss what can be done and how can we do it by working together. Private, public, civil society working together. And these drops at the end there is what we're looking for, the concrete proposals that can be implemented by someone on the ground. We have established these kind of multi-stakeholder processes in a few countries. We are in a process to doing it in more. Tanzania is just one of them. And we realize the challenges and the opportunities that that country has. Here you see the example from South Africa. The logos there represent both companies, public entities, including municipalities, civil society organizations, working together in this manner. And they have developed a number of concrete proposals that are now being implemented by various actors on the ground. Here is our multi-stakeholder platform in Tanzania. Wish us luck. We will need it. Thank you.
Thank you, Andres. We'll move right now to the presentation by Ania.
Thank you very much, Mohamed. And thank you also to Jamie for the vision for holding this conference here in Chapel Hill, and to Felix for the wonderful organization and inspiration. I won't be showing you a presentation today. I'll be sharing with you some ideas, because I don't know if I'm here speaking to the converted or not. And I'll be very interested to find out through the conference declaration, and if there is a mechanism for the conference declaration itself, actually how you respond to what I'm going to convey to you today. First of all, I'd like to say that compared to the Nexus conference in Bonn 2011, which was focusing on water, energy, and food, I find it's very significant that climate has been added into this nexus, because it's climate that's making it critically urgent that we understand better these vital interrelationships among resource flows. We need to understand these global systems which we're establishing and managing in the cases of food and energy. In the case of the global water cycle and global climate, we're simply tampering with these global systems. We have little time to understand better what we're doing. The OECD is now calling for the world economy to decarbonize completely by 2060, to aim for zero carbon emissions through green growth approaches. This is a very deep economic and social transformation which would be required. And I find it very significant because these and other calls on the climate space are an attempt to start managing that global climate, or at least the greenhouse gases, the carbon dioxide and the methane emissions released into the atmosphere. Perhaps we also now need to start thinking in terms of management and stewardship of the global water cycle. And I'll come back to that because that has implications for the medium-term goals which are on the table within the post-2015 development agenda, looking towards 2030. But first, to come back to the Nexus. Yesterday we had a side event on drought entitled Water, Food and Drought. But in fact, drought is a classic Nexus issue, as we discussed yesterday. It's when drought strikes that the interconnections and trade-offs between water supply provision, energy production, mainly hydropower, and food production become painfully apparent. Droughts also impact so many other aspects of life, the functioning of cities, health systems, ecosystems. Making the link to the climate dimension, the IPCC is predicting that we will experience more frequent and more severe droughts, as well as other extreme weather events. So there's a tremendous need for governments to have proactive drought policies to be in place when drought hits, not only reactive measures taken when the drought is already well advanced. There's a need for drought prediction and monitoring, for financial measures, for risk management through clever insurance schemes, risk pooling for poor farmers, etc. Drought affects poorest people the most through food shortages. But ultimately, through the Nexus, drought affects everyone. And drought needs to be tackled at different scales, from individual farmers to rural communities and cities, to national level policies and platforms that address also addressing transboundary implications, as drought is a regional phenomenon that is a stress test for the water, food, energy, climate nexus. The Nexus approach can be very useful indeed at the regional and transboundary level, particularly in the case of those countries where regional cooperation can be hampered by issues of water sharing, where water stresses are chronic, or where development is so rapid that it is raising serious water resource issues. In these cases, the Nexus approach can help to illuminate the possibilities of regional sharing of benefits that go much beyond water, to food production and trade, to energy production and regional power distribution, and indeed to regional climate prediction and monitoring. But at the other extreme of climate extremes, when flooding hits, there are also serious implications for farmers in terms of crop issues, as well as for cities, for infrastructure, for entire economies. The floods in Thailand in 2011 affected global supply chains, from hard drives to rice production. Energy production can come under threat too. Think of Fukushima. The loss of ice and snowpack, and above all sea level rise, will threaten food production and energy production in the crowded and highly productive coastal areas and deltas around the world. So the climate link is crucial in raising awareness of the water risks and the Nexus risks, which the business community and the World Economic Forum are now highlighting. Our highly interlinked and interconnected global systems are delicately balanced, and nobody wants to test their robustness. So to come back to the Nexus and the post-2015 development agenda, the whole question of sustainability, I want to challenge you. What is the weak link in the Nexus? Food and energy are huge, well-funded economic sectors with strong private sector involvement, plenty of data to support decision-making, and strong international bodies, interests, lobbies. Climate has its international architecture, but water has none of this. There's been massive underinvestment in water management and the development of water infrastructure over the past decades. There's a huge lack of data, and the fragmentation of the water sector has meant that water is effectively the weak link in the Nexus. The Global Water Partnership is very aware of this, as GWP has been part of this fragmented water community since its inception in 1996. We sometimes say that GWP is the Carioca, born in Rio. GWP is a partnership for sustainable development that bases its work on the Dublin Rio principles, on the pillars of economic efficiency, social equity, and environmental sustainability. And we've been articulating the principles, the methodologies, and tools which support the integrated management of water resources, the policy reform, the legal and regulatory frameworks which are needed. We've done this in over 40 countries to date. We have over 3,000 partner organizations worldwide and country water partnerships set up as multi-stakeholder platforms in 86 countries now, with the newest being Somalia. Yet, we are very aware of the slow pace of water reform. We are very aware that integration, even among water institutions at different levels and across administrative boundaries, is difficult, while reaching out and working effectively with the food and energy sectors can be even more difficult. Yet it is essential. And we're finding that working through programs on water security and climate resilience, working towards climate adaptation, provides a good way forward. And an example of that are the joint programs that we have with WMO on integrated flood management and integrated drought management. We're finding that really provides a good way in to Nexus approaches. In our new strategy through to 2020, which will be launched on World Water Day in 2 weeks' time, we are emphasizing work on water and climate resilience, water and food, water and energy, integrated urban water management for sustainable cities, water and ecosystems. The Nexus approach takes us upward and onward, further and deeper into the integration that's needed. Now, in terms of the post-2015 agenda, within these imperatives of poverty eradication and sustainability, these twin imperatives of the agenda, we're arguing for water not as an either-or, as a dedicated water goal, or as a cross-cutting area, but to have both. And I think Paula's very articulate and eloquent presentation has shown us a way forward on this. GWP is currently organizing national stakeholder consultations in 31 countries, looking at the need for a global water goal, but also looking at the specific targets and indicators and the implications for those countries on actually how those targets could be met, what the data needs are, and so on. These are multi-stakeholder discussions involving civil society, women's organizations, youth organizations, as well as government, academia, and the private sector. And the aim is to try to convey the voices of the stakeholders into the discussions in New York. We did a first phase last year with 22 countries where the synthesis report did feed into the discussions of the open working group. And we hope that there may be now an opportunity with a second round of working with 31 countries that, again, that the countries would convey to their representatives in New York and convey those messages into the discussions in the open working group. These are all countries that have a seat within the open working group. Without a global water goal, we'll have business as usual, have underinvestment and undermanagement of water. But we do also need those Nexus targets on water and energy, water and food, water and cities, water and ecosystems. I think from the experience that I had in New York recently in the thematic debate on water sanitation and sustainable energy, it became clear to me that many countries do see the need for a water goal, but there are still those who do not. And there are strong voices out there, such as the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, who are saying that water should be subsumed under the goals they are proposing for food and energy and cities. So despite the powerful words from Paula and others implying that there is good agreement on a water goal, I've concluded that it's by no means a done deal. And with reference to the Nexus, our message really needs to be that we need both. A water goal to enable the water cycle to be managed and measured much better than it currently is, as well as the Nexus targets that Paula's talking about. So my request and plea to all of you here at this conference, with regard to this valuable conference declaration, which I'm sure is going to have an input into the discussions of the Open Working Group, to really include the need for both and to spell it out, that we do need a water goal as well as Nexus targets. And I'm sure this could have a great influence and input. I look forward to hearing your views on this and to find out whether I really have been talking to the converted this morning or whether there are people here who feel strongly otherwise. Thank you.
Thank you, Ania, for the outstanding presentation. Next presentation is Sylvia, Manager of Water at Skoll Global Threat.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this conference. I want to start off talking a little bit about who we are as an organization, as most of you might not be as familiar with us. I work for Skoll Global Threats Fund. Skoll Global Threats Fund was founded by Jeff Skoll, who was the first president of eBay. Subsequent to founding eBay, Jeff has also been very involved in philanthropy. He founded one of our sister organizations called Skoll Foundation that focuses on social entrepreneurship. My colleague David Rothschild back there will be speaking on entrepreneurship and the Nexus at lunch, so be sure to go to that. Jeff also has founded a media company that does movies and now television. Some of the movies you have heard of, I'm sure, Inconvenient Truth, Food Inc., and maybe even movies that you have seen, like Contagion, Lincoln, all movies with a social message. A few years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, he founded us, the Skoll Global Threats Fund. Another private foundation. We're also based in California, but we're supposed to focus on global threats facing our world. And we define global threats as threats that can bring humanity to our knees, alone or through cascading negative effects made worse by factors unique to us, to these new times. And we focus on 5 global threats, and they're listed up there. By no means, of course, that these are the only global threats in the world, but these are the 5 that we're working on right now. And it became pretty clear early on that if we were to work on some of these global threats, that without working or looking at energy or food, it wouldn't really be possible. And so, as an organization, we've been structured to think very interdisciplinarily. And one of the things that I think Jamie said yesterday, that the fact that a lot of our institutions today are set up by sectors is not adequate. So we started off our organization trying to bring all the different disciplines with folks from different backgrounds together. And it's a work in progress. I have to say is difficult. Even being there for a couple of years, just the other day, one of my colleagues, there's only a couple of us working on water there, one of my colleagues came up to me and said, "You've been talking about water resource management for the last 2 years. What exactly do you mean by that?" So it's even within an organization with the DNA to look at these issues in an interconnected way is still very difficult because we come from very different backgrounds and very different language. And amazed at us trying to look at it across different organizations, across different disciplines, internationally. I can only imagine that it's even going to be more and more complicated. And these issues obviously are even harder when you look at the transboundary nature of it, not just in water, but obviously energy and food and trade, plus climate with the added uncertainty. And it was really encouraging yesterday that we talked about how scientists are leading the way, but there are also obviously other folks that are doing the same. Yesterday, 2 days ago, the quadrennial defense review by the DoD highlighted the need to start looking at climate change as it impacts energy and climate security for the very first time, and how it impacts missions by the DoD around the world. And so there are the whole energy, food, climate, water nexus is not only rising in the scientific community, but also clearly in the security community. Yesterday, Johan put up a map, very complicated map by the World Economic Forum on global risk. I used to work in the global risk team at the World Economic Forum. This was a simplified version of the Nexus that we did a few years back. What you didn't want to see was it looked like this before, and then we realized no one really wanted to see this. But we really wanted to understand how these different issues are interconnected, but also what are the drivers, and are there key leverage points that we could focus on as it propagates in this network. But you saw this other version because it's a simplified version and it's easier to digest, but reality is complicated. But also we need to think about how we would want to communicate this kind of complexity to vast majority of the population. So we heard a lot of words and about how the Nexus is all interconnected. But as a foundation, we've decided initially to focus on 3 main areas. This, of course, by no means is what the world should focus on, but is this what we feel as a foundation based in California? It's what we can focus on at this moment in time. Data and information, everyone talked a lot about it already. I don't think I need to talk about why is needed. Where we've focused more on is twofold. One is on the satellite imagery, and then the second is on the ground data collection. We all know it's very difficult, but we feel that is an area worthwhile for us to explore more. We've started a partnership with NASA to get more satellite imagery data for agriculture and water in South Asia. But the one that I want to highlight more is the development of new technologies like microsatellites that could get higher frequency and higher resolution satellite imagery. And this is a project that we partnered with USGS and FuseNet to get some of this private sector satellite images and mapping it to a location in Senegal to really greatly improve the ability to get evaporation estimates. And the left one is the higher resolution one, and the right one is the less resolution. These are the types of things that we've been exploring, and we're really excited by where the technology is going in the next few years. Skip that one. The other project that we've been focusing on is on-the-ground reporting. And it's not so much that getting data on the ground that's important, but also telling that story. How do you, most of us probably have a technical background, but how do you get that story out that makes it compelling to not just us, not just policymakers, but the general public. And so what we've been doing is we've been partnering with Circle of Blue and Wilson Center and their scientists and journalists that can really create graphics and telling stories that really start grabbing attention. Yesterday I went to a session where we need to improve science communication, and that's definitely necessary. But the other side that we really need to be better at is actually bringing the people who really tell stories well to our cause. And that's another area that we've been really focusing on. And also, it's a different approach. Journalists just not shy about asking for things and talking to people. And it's just a very different approach. The second area that we focused on is decision support tools. And there are a lot of them. I saw some great ones yesterday in different sessions I went to. Here's just a few ones that we've supported. It's not so much about these tools specifically, but we feel that making tools that are easy to use, visually appealing, is a good way to engage more folks. And this is our partner, the World Resources Institute, and the Aqueduct Map on irrigated agriculture, including climate. And these, I think Koch is also a partner on this, providing a lot of the background data. Another partner series that looks at energy security in North America, on the shale energy development, China. Again, I don't want to talk in detail about these particular graphs, but I think there's something about visual and tools that are easy to digest and get the message out very quickly and easily. The third area, which is the hardest for us to get a grasp on, is the governance piece. We have funded different folks to try different types of governance, really try to involve local stakeholders, bringing agriculture, energy, and water folks together at a local level. We've tried different things. The one that I want to mention that we're really trying to get a handle on is, as you could tell, we've been focused very much on data and information because we think that will hopefully create change in behavior. One of the things we did do, and you can't probably see it so well, is we commissioned a war game that had different dimensions: political, economic, agriculture, energy, and then we had different people playing different roles: prime ministers, energy ministers, water ministers, and everyday people. And while they had all the data that they needed to make decisions, when we actually played the game in a simulated game, people just did what they wanted to do anyway. I mean, they just did what really was a political and economic that drove decision-making in water, agriculture, and energy. We've only tried one instance of this game. We're going to try a few more instances, but I think that's something we need to keep in mind. The political economy of the Nexus issues is how do you balance that, and how do you create incentives that make it align with the politics and the economics of these issues. These are some of the things that we've tried that we think could be applicable to other folks here. We like experimenting with different ideas. I think that's where we think the role of a foundation should play. But obviously we're early in our journey, but I'd be happy to talk to more folks about potentially new ideas or new approaches, and also to think through what a role for a foundation like ourselves ought to play. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Sylvia. And our last presentation for this session is the view of private sector, presented by Koch from Coca-Cola.
Help. Kyle, if somebody could help me with this. Thank you, Mohamed, and thank you to Jamie Bartram and Felix Dodds for inviting me to participate in the conference. I stepped out of the conference earlier this morning, and I apologize to Paula, to take a call that seemed urgent, and I wish I hadn't taken it. Well, I have my own little Nexus issue. So a tree fell, a rather large tree, thank you, on the property back home in Atlanta. And as the roots came up, it uprooted a water line and broke it. So I've got water. The tree, as it came down, cut the power line to the house, so I've got energy. It also crushed the cars, so I can't go buy food. So I've got my own little food, water, energy Nexus crisis unfolding here. But I'm still here. Nothing I can do about it. So you saw some of these slides when Sylvia just presented. She gave you some global views. And so this is part of some research that we did with the World Resources Institute, WRI, and that we presented at the Bonn Nexus conference. And so here you're seeing power generation and baseline water stress from a renewable quantity standpoint. And the dots are thermal or hydropower generation stations. The size of the dot tells you how many megawatts, all the details are there. And so you focus here, just for the sake of example, on Northeast India, and you could see that things are pretty good. But when you take IPCC's scenario out to 2025, scenario A1B, which is sort of middle of the road, not worst case, not best case, you see significantly more stress now this is the rate of change, not the absolute stress. So this is the rate of change out to 2025. That's a little more than 10 years out. And the whole region, Southeast Asia, what you're looking at on the map, has 55% of power generation going from significantly to exceptionally more water stressed in this short time frame. Let's look at irrigated agriculture. And here we're focused on southern China, just on the mainland there. And so you see, again, baseline water stress. And if you're familiar with China, the southern part is the wetter part, and the northeast, where Beijing and other provinces, is a lot drier. And then again, when you fast forward a little more than 10 years, you see significant stress or the rate of change in water stress. In fact, 75% of irrigated crops in Southeast Asia, the whole map that you're looking at in terms of irrigated agriculture, is going from significantly to exceptionally more stressed in terms of a rate of change. So why do I show you these slides? Well, really for three reasons. One is that we are seeing these stresses manifest themselves. So at the end of last year, I was in this part of China on some work we're doing with WWF, on tea gardens, as well as other agricultural crops, and we're already starting to see the effects of what these models predict in terms of water stress and what that has in terms of implications on food supply, in this case, tea. Secondly, to tell you that we are most concerned about this from the Coca-Cola system standpoint because of how it relates to our supply chains. When you look at what we purchase, what we bring into our business, it's largely agriculture. We're a very large buyer of a lot of different agricultural crops and ingredients, from sweeteners to almost any juice you can think of. Second largest tea buyer in the world, top 5 coffee buyer. So we have a very diversified portfolio, but it's all agricultural based. And so power generation, of course, is vital to manufacturing, but also our markets, and then agriculture being such a large user of water. Studies and models and the reality of these types of nexus issues plays heavily into our strategic planning, and as I said earlier, we're already seeing it. So what has our response been? Here you can see the top goals that we have in the areas of food, water, and energy. I won't read them. The slides will be available, but we have broad goals with sub-tier goals, or I might say broad targets with sub-tier goals under each of them around water in terms of the concept of replenishment, and then into water efficiency, source protection, risk management, what have you. And then similarly for energy efficiency under the broader target of value chain, sort of the drink in your hand, carbon footprint reduction, all out to 2020. And then lastly, under sustainable sourcing. Last summer we announced our goal that we would sustainably source 100% of all of our top agricultural ingredients. And that's the most impactful goal as it relates to the Nexus. I'd first say that we have a lot of room to learn in how to implement action across these three categories and apply Nexus-type thinking. And the place where I think we will do it the strongest is in agriculture, both because of its scale relative to our direct operations, but also due to the shared nature of agricultural supply chains. We don't own our own supply chains. We're not vertically integrated in that way. And so where we buy mangoes or where we buy sugar or orange juice is where other food and beverage companies do the same. And so the synergies that are needed among different buyers as well as suppliers and governments, and the trade-offs that need to be made across the Nexus happens at a scale in agriculture that, at least for us, is going to be our main entry into that applied Nexus action, if you will. And of course, all of this has to be done in a world where we have all these rising stressors, from the realization of climate change, population growth, and income or economic development, particularly in the emerging and developing markets. And therein lies a conundrum that I face in many parts of the world. And it gets to the broader points that Paula was making and that we heard in the plenary sessions last night around equality, around human rights, around gender equality, all of the human focused, the people focused aspects. And what I see is the need to translate the technical and the scientific and the policy thinking around the food, water, energy nexus into human rights as well. So take, for example, the rights around water and sanitation. If you react single variantly to a multivariant problem, which is what we're seeing in old way thinking on the science and the policy, you can work to respect or fulfill water rights, but in doing so, you might actually negatively impact human rights on access to food or education. So the same type of thinking in the resources of food, water, and energy and how those move through the economy has to be integrally related, or rather aligned with Nexus thinking in the human rights context as well. And that gives it an added challenge given the people focus. But it's vastly important. So what more is needed? The declaration for this conference echoes many of these sentiments. These I lifted directly from the SDG development work that we participated in through the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and they're almost parroted to a great extent in the draft declaration for this conference. I could say that the last one is one that hasn't gotten attention for the most part, and that is the role of the finance sector. They need to be at conferences like this. They need to have Nexus issues explained to them, and it needs to factor into their decision making as well. So not just the multilateral banks, like the development banks, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, what have you, but also mainstream financing has to understand their loan practices, their debt financing as it applies to the Nexus, because nothing happens without financing, and so they need to be an integral part of this. As you heard Anders say, we are part of the 2030 Water Resources Group, and it is through that resources group that we most actively engage on the Nexus. So you saw the examples from Tanzania and from South Africa, and yes, it's the Water Resources Group, but the issues that we raise and the tough choices and the trade-offs that governments need to make lie at the heart of the Nexus, and that's what comes to light when you do the hydroeconomic modeling as an entry point, if you will, that Anders explained. So I'll end briefly with a Nexus problem hiding as a water problem. And I do this because of something Jamie Bartram said last night in his opening comments, and that is to use the interlinked approach that Paolo talked about, to use the Nexus multivariant approach and to look at it as an added benefit versus another more difficult way of trying to solve problems. I think that what's exciting is that as tough as it is, as complex as some of the Nexus problems can be, the opportunities that it affords to bring to light issues and raise up what those tough choices and trade-offs are, I think is exciting. It doesn't mean that everyone's going to get all the water or energy or food that they need for a particular economy, but I think it does crystallize what the choices are that need to be made. And so I do that with an example from quite close to here, and this is the states of Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. And for those of you who know, the river systems, particularly the one in the middle, the Chattahoochee, Apalachicola, is involved in a multi-year, decade-plus long legal battle over water. They call it the Tri-State Water War. And the public arguments are all about, and the legal arguments, this is in federal courts and playing out in many ways in local courts, are all about water. Water in the sense of flood control, water for transportation, the aesthetic qualities of water, water for consumption, water for business, drinking water, water for recreation, what have you. And that's what is at the heart of the whole debate. In fact, when you pull up the literature that is out there, and this is just one screenshot from the Atlanta Regional Commission, and how they portray it. And if you click on all these links, what you read about, again, is water. You read about all aspects of water, when in fact, this is a Nexus problem, disguised as a water problem and being debated and argued in courts, in federal courts, probably ultimately at the Supreme Court, if not through legislation in the U.S. Congress, all around water, when in fact it is a Nexus issue. And so the arrows are just pointing to key power generation, both hydropower and cooling for thermal, coal-fired plants, as well as key growing areas for crops on land, as well as fisheries, particularly the oyster fishery in the Apalachicola Bay area there at the bottom. And so what I posit is that the first state of these three that articulates the Nexus problem as it exists here and what benefits are being derived through food, water, and energy as a use of these water resources, I think has the best chance of reaching a solution. I'm not suggesting that the state that does this is going to win, so to speak, in terms of the legal battle, but the legal battle has been raging. There's a lot of uncertainty. Business doesn't like that. You don't like that. And so I think if you use the Nexus to highlight what the real issues are, and that they go well beyond water, into economies, into livelihoods, into economic development, you name it, poverty alleviation, and of course food and energy, that you have then a clearer set of trade-offs that can be analyzed and ultimately decided on. So, thank you.
Thank you, Greg, and I believe we had very interesting and thought-provoking presentations reflecting a different perspective to the issue of Nexus. Apparently we went well beyond our time, but I think we still have some room for Q&As and some debate. I believe that to me, the main line really between the presentations was to sort of, as the Nexus issue, it's quite a complex question. It's not an easy question. It's not a simple one. So each presentation was sort of suggesting an entry point. The first one, to me, was working on country levels, targeting those most in need, those most vulnerable. This can be an entry point. The second one by Ania was targeting the weak link in the Nexus, water, which is suffering from mismanagement and underinvestment as well. That can be another entry point. The third one by Sylvia was working on the institutional level. We have problems in the institutions ourselves. Before we address the Nexus, there is a lack of Nexus, so to speak, within the institutions, how this can be as well a way or an approach. And the third one focused on the rights approach as well, and explaining the Nexus on a different level so that it can be used and approach. I would like to seek your views and hear your comments. So if you can introduce yourself and make your comments briefly. Yeah.
Adding 2 sentences to the declaration and invite, if I may, the comments of the panel on these sentences. They are people-focused on the demand side. The first one has been integrated goals, and it would be promote gender equity by ensuring universal access to secondary education for girls and implementing a woman's basic human right to decide the number and spacing of her children. And then under the needs for goals and partnerships, a slightly longer sentence, access to reproductive health, including a woman's basic human right to decide the number and spacing of her children, also accelerates declines in birth rates in a human rights framework and reduces the demand for water and food, relieves pressure on biodiversity, helps adaptation and mitigation of climate change, and makes the world a safer place. I'd like comments.
Thank you. Do we have other comments or questions? What I intend to do is to have a round of comments and questions first, and then give the floor to the panel. Yes, please.
My name is Henk Holtslag from Netherlands. I'm advisor on low-cost technologies working in Africa. I was inspired by the presentation of Ania Grobicki to get more attention on water in the declaration. Now the declaration says something on the Nexus challenge to the urban context. Now, is it an idea to also add something like the Nexus challenge to the rural context? Because there's 2 major reasons. There are 780 million people that do not have access to improved water sources. 80% of those live in a rural area. And the situation is dramatic. You all know that 35% of the hand pumps in Africa do not work because of the failed VLOM system. You know, a lot of pumps are not working. And the second reason is that rural water is one of the solutions for the food production, for food security. Mr. Paul Polak of IDE once said that small farmers can double the food production in the world if they would have access to markets and to low-cost or affordable irrigation. So those are 2 reasons why to put more emphasis in the declaration on rural water. I would like your comments on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, please.
My name is Shanna Frickles, and I'm with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. So I was interested specifically in what Greg, Mr. Koch, was saying as a leader of corporate stewardship. You mentioned that finance is a crucial part of the solution that isn't necessarily here as readily as some of the other sectors. And so yesterday I was also hearing a lot about implementation and commercialization and scaling as a necessary part of really bringing this down to where it's needing to be. So how can businesses or other businesses interested in civic leadership step in here and bridge that gap in a way that's most effective?
Thank you.
Mary Gilbert, Quaker Earth Care Witness. My understanding of private enterprise is that it's very profit-driven. And I would like to ask the people who are involved, people on the panel who are involved in profit-making, which I think, I believe, not well, certainly Coca-Cola, but I believe also the water board. I'm sorry if I can't remember the right names. How can you factor in human needs and so on in a primarily profit-driven enterprise? I believe that one problem is the short-term view of profit-making corporations, looking at what you're going to get for the next quarter and having trouble seeing beyond that. I'd like to know whether companies like Coca-Cola do any work looking at the impact of water extraction on agriculture, on the seeping into freshwater systems of salt water and things like that. How do you get to be good guys if you're looking for profit?
Thank you for that question. I'll give the floor now to the panel to respond. Maybe I would start by Ania and Greg, as many of the comments really were addressed to them. Then we'll seek the views of the other members of the panel. Ania, would you like to start?
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, particularly for the comments regarding the need for rural views on the Nexus and supporting rural people. The way that the Global Water Partnership works is that it's a linkage between local partners and local organizations. And I'd just like to emphasize that it's really essential to have this local ownership of policies and solutions. Having said that, the technology and tools can be very valuable, very helpful. They can help to move things forward. But they need to be taken on board by local organizations and local experts. And I think that is really that crucial sort of missing link sometimes when we talk about the science policy interface, when we talk about science, technology, and research, is to look at the capacity in countries to do their own work and their own research, to take on board new technologies and new tools and to apply them in the local situation. Otherwise, these kinds of solutions can be unsustainable, as the person mentioned. So we feel very much it's got to be a partnership on the ground, and not so much in parachuting in solutions, but this is where the SDGs can be incredibly helpful. If countries truly commit, then it becomes a country's decision to implement things in a particular way, to support things in a particular way to achieve those targets. And that is why this discussion on the SDGs is particularly crucial. It's the local, the country commitment and buy-in that's essential there. Thank you.
Thanks, Ania. Greg?
Sure. So the two questions directed at me. So I'll take the first one. how can business step in? I think you're already seeing business step in. More is certainly needed, but leading business, particularly those that are multinational, those that take a longer-term view in their recognition of the challenges and the risks that are ahead, and their desire to help solve them. So more is definitely needed, but particularly around the Nexus, through the lens of the 2030 Water Resources Group, I think the role of business is clearly demonstrated in two ways. One, we are part of this public-private consortium that makes up the 2030 Water Resources Group. So you have WWF, you have the Global Water Partnership, you also have Nestle, Coca-Cola, and then secondly, there's also a pre-competitive nature to this, in that the other company currently involved at the global level is PepsiCo. PepsiCo is a big competitor of ours, and you'll hear later today after lunch from Dan Benna with PepsiCo. He's also on the steering board, and they are involved in all of these countries. I think what business needs to realize is what we have realized, PepsiCo and Coca-Cola, but also Nestle and many other companies locally, is that these types of issues are pre-competitive. You know, we compete on the marketplace shelf, but resource management, Nexus challenges and solutions through whatever lens you take, in our case water, are pre-competitive issues, and we should work together with civil society and governments as we're doing through the Water Resources Group to address that. Then to your question, ma'am. So what is it that we do from a human rights standpoint from water? 6 years ago, we instituted a policy of taking a rights-based approach to both the siting of new plants as well as in the operation of existing plants. So that rights-based approach, it's a fully governed program on our part, both in the due diligence for new siting as well as direct operations. We have to look at the quantity and quality of water that we use and its impact on business, on society and communities, particularly the most vulnerable communities, and we also have to look at wastewater discharges. Now, we've implemented that and have been executing against that for 6 years now, but along the way, John Ruggie and his group, John Ruggie was the Special Rapporteur to the UN Human Rights Council on Business and Human Rights, issued their guiding principles. And so through the CEO Water Mandate, which is part of the UN Global Compact, we are working with Oxfam and a company called SHIFT, or an organization, which is a group of people that used to work with John Ruggie when he was in that Special Rapporteur role, to develop guidance for mandate endorsers on respecting the human right to water and sanitation. We've been an active part, as has PepsiCo and many other companies that are part of the CEO Water Mandate in its development. It's slated for publication by Stockholm of this year, and then we have the chance, at least from our end, to revise that rights-based approach that we have in existence now for 6 years to reflect what this guidance says. But when you look at our business, it's a bit unique, and I'll just end with that. We're not an export company. So, we have 1,000 plants. We operate all over the place. But each one of those plants serves a contiguous market. So we're not making a product and then shipping it around the world. We're making a product and selling it to people who are our neighbors, literally to the plant. And so there's other businesses like that, but not all businesses like that. But from our perspective, we have to take an active role in societal issues, because it's not about being a good corporate citizen. For us, it really is the health of our business being directly tied to the health of that community, from a water lens, from a gender equality lens, whatever perspective you have.
Thank you, Greg. For the sake of time, I'll take the two questions first and then come back to Anderson and Sylvia, please.
He was first, actually.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Mohamed Yassin from University of Udine in Italy and visiting school in Minnesota University. I will take the red box of the Nexus, which is security, and one of these slides has one of these presentations has touched the human security as crude security. And one of the boxes was just putting the Middle East conflict as global threat. Within the context of the sustainable development goals and so on, in marginalized areas which are not counted within the global agenda. These areas where we have protracted crisis and conflict, droughts, and so on for almost 50 years or many years, like the reality from which I am coming. In these cases, these conflicts are jeopardizing the development process. So, in this case, the reality, the priority will not be anymore development, but restoring peace and turning to normality. So, is there any room within these sustainable development goals to give priority to peace and stability of people in terms of individuals, or massive stabilization of people, prevention of internal massive displacement, and so on, and also prevention of conflicts and so on, in order to guarantee the security of water, security of food, security of climate, and all the securities. Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Michael Davidson. I'm an independent irrigation engineer working primarily in West Africa. And I should preface this by saying I don't drink Coca-Cola, but I think that there's a disconnect here between the development community and the professional agricultural, particularly irrigation community. And agriculture is a business. And I think it needs help from governments, needs help from the development community, but primarily there are specific stakeholders of irrigation manufacturers, designers, installers, et cetera, that are not in this room, who have an incredible amount to contribute. And I think that disconnect, I mean, they're not here and you're not there. And if we're using 70 to 80% of the water, I think we're not going to advance until we get these communities together. So my question is, if there's room in the Nexus for the professional business side, particularly of agriculture, and talking about in terms of cultivars, we're talking in terms of nutrients, but they have to be part of the Nexus on a professional level so we can take quantitative data, make good decisions about where we're applying products, where we're being successful, we're not successful. And I'll just end with this. The non-professional people who are supplying irrigation products, and I've seen this over and over again, our estimates are that, and there's good quantitative studies to support this, 85% of all drip irrigation that has been distributed by NGOs in Africa have been abandoned within a 2 to 3 year period because they're not being professionally supported. And so that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you a lot for your question. I'll turn now to Andres and then Sylvia afterwards. The Mission Impossible is that we need to finish in 3 to 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mohamed. I pick a couple of the questions, maybe commenting on the need to include the financial sector in the work, in this kind of work. And definitely, I totally agree they have to be involved. They can be one of the solution providers on the financial side. Just take our example in South Africa. Well, firstly, we mentioned some of the companies that we work with on the global level, but when we work in a particular country, we do reach out very actively to all the local companies there, and they are the ones who get on board. And in the case of South Africa, we had the benefit of having 2 financial institutions in that multi-stakeholder platform. For example, the Development Bank of South Africa and also one of the regular commercial banks. And that has really helped us in shaping some of the solutions, such as access to finance for really small-scale drip irrigation for smallholder farmers, for example, but also other infrastructure projects, for example. So getting them on board is crucial, I think. Second one, just a reflection on the involvement of the private sector and why are they involved. And you're absolutely right. Of course, they are profit-driven. That's the nature of these companies. But I think in particular, many of these multinational companies have realized that they have to look beyond the next quarter. They have to look for the long-term profitability of their company. And then coming to a quote by the chairman of the Water Resource Group, who also happens to be the chairman of Nestlé, water really struck him as a key issue to address for his company when they were celebrating their 100-year anniversary. And he and the group as such were considering, so what is the most critical factor that can also help us in celebrating a 200-year anniversary for this company? And water was the obvious question. So they realized that they need to work to make water, or to help governments to manage the water resources in a more sustainable way for their really long-term operation. And that is why they are reaching out to even countries where they are not maybe working themselves, because those countries need to prosper and grow, etc., for the future in order to also have a market.
Thank you, Andres. Sylvia, you have the final word.
I wish I have something brilliant to say as the final word, but I think a little bit on the private sector. I think we always lump private sector in thinking it's the Coches and the Pepsi and the Nestlés. And there are the investors, and even within investors is different between angel investors versus institutional investors, and they all have different, institutional investors look much longer term than say an angel investor. And then we don't have small landholder farmers here who you could argue could also be private sector. I was talking about journalists, they're certainly a private sector. So it's much more nuanced and much more, is much more nuanced than just private sector generally. And of course I have to give a shout out to social entrepreneurs. As you know, a member of the Skoll family, social entrepreneurs that look at not just the profit, but double or triple bottom line, environmental and social benefits as well. And it's certainly a growing field. More and more new entrepreneurs are really looking at beyond just the profits. So it's certainly a trend that we're seeing from the foundation perspective.
Thank you, Sylvia. At the end, I would like really to thank the panelists, and I would like to invite to give them a round of applause. I think we had really fantastic presentations. And I would like to thank you as well for your patience and apologies.